I want to turn back to the hearing. Republican presidential candidate Senator John McCain seemed to imply that al-Qaeda could belong to either, quote, an obscure sect of the Shias or, quote, the Sunnis or anybody else.
There are numerous threats to security in Iraq and the future of Iraq. Do you still view al-Qaeda in Iraq as a major threat?
It is still a major threat, though it is certainly not as major a threat as it was, say, 15 months ago.
Certainly not an obscure sect of the Shiites all overall, or Sunnis or anybody else.
Senator McCain's statement yesterday came less than a month after he insisted Iran is training al-Qaeda. He corrected himself after Senator Joe Lieberman stepped in. This was in Jordan, and whispered in his ear.
Well, it's common knowledge and has been reported in the media that that al-Qaeda is going back into Iran and receiving training and are coming back into Iraq from Iran. That's well known, and it's unfortunate. So I believe that we are succeeding in Iraq. The situation is dramatically improved, but I also want to emphasize time and again, al-Qaeda is on the run, but they are not defeated.
You said that the Iranians were training al-Qaeda.
I'm sorry, the Iranians are training extremists, not al-Qaeda. Not al-Qaeda, I'm sorry.
Eli Lake, what about this confusion?
I mean, listen, the Iranians have some connections with Sunni insurgents. The military said that. They also have had, according to the 9/11 Commission, plenty of contacts with al-Qaeda. It's not a hard concept that I never understood why the left doesn't understand this, that sometimes people who are competitors, like Sunni terrorists and Shia terrorists, will collaborate against a common enemy. In this case, it would be, I would say, the prospects of an Iraqi democracy and, of course, the American military presence. And there is some degree of cooperation. What he specifically said about Iran training members of al-Qaeda, there is really not much evidence of that kind of training relationship, but an organization that calls itself al-Qaeda in Kurdistan, or Ansar al-Sunnah, which is part of sort of larger Islamic State of Iraq, is based in the 5 towns on the border of the Iraqi Kurdistan on the Iran side and receives political refugee cards, according to my own reporting from the ground, talking to Kurdish security officials at the time, who are on the record. And I might add that the Kurdish security officials who spoke with me have a fairly good relationship with the Iranian government, but they have made this clear so many times in their own diplomatic discussions with them and saying, hey, you've got to cut this out. So, listen, is it the exact relationship that McCain said, but hardly the gaffe that some people have sort of made it out to be?
Arun Gupta.
Yeah, I think this would make for great fiction, but there doesn't seem to be any congress with reality in what Mr. Lake is saying. I want to pick up on some of the things he said initially. Betrayed the Iraqi people to al-Qaeda and the Ba'athis. Well, that's precisely who is in these awakening groups, these concerned citizen councils that General Petraeus has been setting up over the last years. It's well known that these are former insurgents, that there was an excellent report by Nir Rosen, who was on the show last week in Rolling Stone, who was even interviewing members of these awakening groups who were al-Qaeda. And then Mr. Lake talked about special groups targeting civilians. That's really a remarkable assertion to make when in the last 2 weeks we've seen U.S. fighter jets and helicopter gunships strafing some of the densest urban areas in the world, such as Sadr City, killing hundreds of civilians. And then he talks about Iranians playing all sides. Again, that's a complete fiction compared to the fact that it's the U.S. who is playing all sides. We're setting Sunni against Shia. We're setting Sunni against Sunni. We're setting Shia against Shia. What's really going on in Basra is the fruition of a long-term policy that goes back all the way to 2004 when General Petraeus was in charge of all Iraqi police and military training and set up these forces that became death squads, the special police commandos and all these various irregular forces that were used against this Sunni insurgency. And what's gone on over the last year and a half is a strategy first to isolate the Sadrists in the parliament and then to use the Badr Brigade, which is with this the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, which is actually an Iranian created organization from the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. So essentially what you have is the U.S. is using this Badr Brigade militias who are integrated throughout the Iraqi security forces in this attack in Basra. If you look closely at the reporting that came out, the Iraqi government was not really sending down army forces. They were sending down these special police commandos who've been renamed the National Police. They were sending down these SWAT teams that General Petraeus helped set up in the summer of 2004, and they were sending down special forces, which are believed to come largely from Kurdish Peshmerga, all militias. And so really, it's the U.S. who's doing all this. But Mr. Lake is basically trying to weave this fantasy of that Iran is doing this when every single bit of evidence points to he should just substitute United States for Iran.
We have to go to break, but we'll be back with this debate. We are joined by Arun Gupta. He is the editor of the Indypendent, based here in New York. We're joined by Eli Lake. He's with the New York Sun in Washington, D.C., and Gareth Porter of Interpress Service. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Back in a minute.
Miles to Baghdad. What have I become? New York's got snow in April, and I can't locate the sun. Tie a yellow ribbon around something. Something good has begun. Katie holds up the Bible. Are you reading this for fun? 19 miles to Baghdad. Soldiers, load up your guns and
Lizzie West and the White Buffalo here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. This is the day after General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker have reported back to the Congress. They're testifying again today. Our guests discussing what they have found and the questioning of them by, among others, the three leading presidential candidates, McCain, Clinton, and Obama, are Arun Gupta. He's an editor at the Indypendent in New York. Interpress Services, Gareth Porter in Washington, and Eli Lake of the New York Sun, also in D.C. Eli Lake, I wanted to ask you about a piece you'd written, Iran is found to be a lair of al-Qaeda. And I'm reading now from the American Conservative, a piece by Justin Logan. He says Lake published a claim purportedly leaked to him that the National Intelligence Estimate judged that one of two senior al-Qaeda leadership councils meets regularly in eastern Iran. And then he quotes your piece saying, there is little disagreement that a branch of al-Qaeda's leadership operates in Iran, but the intelligence community diverges on the extent to which the hosting of the senior leaders represents a policy of the regime in Tehran or the rogue nations of Iran's Quds Force, the terrorist support units that report directly to Iran's supreme leader. Justin Logan then says, unfortunately for Mr. Lake, the story was tersely refuted by National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats Edward Gistaro, asked at a National Press Club briefing where the judgment Lake described was in the final draft report. Gistaro replied, no, it's not. I don't think it ever was in the draft. I read the Sun article this morning, and I thought, I don't know where this comes from. Your response?
Well, I mean, first of all, I stand by the story, and Gistaro is essentially the official briefer, and if Justin Logan wants to believe the official briefer, but this is widely reported. You know, Fran Townsend has talked about these management councils in the past, and so have numerous people. The truth of the matter is that if you go back to Richard Clarke's book, you can read George Tenet's account of this. After the Afghanistan invasion, you saw the al-Qaeda leadership. Some of them, most of them fled to Pakistan, but some people like Saif al-Adil and Saad bin Laden and others fled to Iran. There was a period of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran about trying to get these senior leaders. It never worked out. And while that was going on, they essentially sort of established a base which most of the communication, at least with al-Qaeda in Iraq, And I want to stress this is fairly general guidance, is coming from Iran and a lot of the transport in that. It's not the same as saying that they're harboring them or that in fact they're sponsoring them, which is a sort of, as I said, kind of a traditional way of describing it. But in fact, they are there. I stand by it, and I've seen the report. So, I mean, I'm happy to have Justin Logan, who I don't particularly think that much of, to challenge it, or whoever. I'm sure Gareth Porter, who says all kinds of crazy things, would like to challenge it,
Well, let's hear what Gareth Porter has to say.
Sure.
Yes, I would like to challenge it. This is again, a very highly selective reading of the intelligence on the situation regarding al-Qaeda operatives in Iran. Yes, they did go into Iran as they did go into Pakistan. Most of them were, of course, in Pakistan and operated very freely in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border area.